Have you ever wondered if a single moment of courage, one small act, when you're terrified but do it anyway, could ripple through time to transform not just your life, but someone else's entirely? Sarah Chun had spent 3 years invisible in the corner cubicle of Morrison and Associates, watching the world move around her while she stayed safely silent. But on the day the CEO walked past her desk, something inside her whispered that this was her chance. The folded piece of paper in her trembling hand contained just 7 words she'd practiced 100 times, but never had the courage to say out loud. She didn't know that 22 floors above, Marcus Morrison was about to make a decision that would destroy everything his late father had built. And she certainly didn't know that her quiet act of bravery was about to save them both. 22 floors above Sarah's cubicle, Marcus Morrison stared at the framed photograph on his desk. His father, William Morrison, smiled back from the silver frame arms crossed, standing in front of the company's original building, pride radiating from his weathered face. It had been 8 months since the funeral, but Marcus still found himself reaching for the phone to call his dad about difficult decisions. Today's decision felt impossible. The board meeting had ended an hour ago, but the voices still echoed in his head. Streamline operations, maximize shareholder value, eliminate redundancies, corporate speak for firing people, lots of people. The consulting firm's report sat open on his desk, its recommendations circled in red ink by board members eager to see immediate results. 300 jobs. That was the magic number that would boost quarterly profits and satisfy the investors, who'd been circling like vultures since his father's death. 300 families who would lose their income because Marcus couldn't figure out how to honor his father's legacy while meeting Wall Street's demands. William Morrison had built the company on a simple principle: take care of your people, and they'll take care of the business. He'd personally known the names of employees' children, remembered birthdays, created the most generous benefits package in the industry. When other firms were laying off during economic downturns, Morrison and Associates found creative ways to keep everyone employed. It wasn't just business philosophy. It was family philosophy, but family businesses had to survive to remain family businesses. Marcus loosened his tie and walked to the wall of windows overlooking downtown. From this height, people looked like ants scurrying between buildings. He wondered how many of those tiny figures were his employees, heading home to spouses and children who depended on Morrison and Associates. Paychecks. His father had died believing the company was in good hands. Marcus had promised at the funeral that he'd protect what William had built. But the numbers didn't lie. Revenues were flat, costs were rising, and competitors were undercutting their bids by using cheaper offshore labor. The consultation report offered a simple solution: automate data processing, outsource client research, and eliminate middle management redundancies. Clean, efficient, profitable. Everything his father had taught him not to be. Marcus picked up his father's fountain pen, the one William had used to sign every major contract. The weight of it felt heavier than usual as he contemplated signing termination orders for people who'd served the company faithfully for years. Sarah's employee badge hung from a frayed lanyard, the plastic edges worn smooth from 3 years of nervous fidgeting. The photo showed a younger version of herself, hopeful eyes that hadn't yet learned to look down when executives passed by. Cubicle 3-47 sat wedged between the copier and the emergency exit, a location that seemed to announce its occupant's expendability. Every morning at 7:15, Sarah arrived with her thermos of green tea and her worn laptop bag. She'd chosen this early hour deliberately. Fewer people meant fewer chances for awkward interactions, fewer reminders that she existed in the margins of Morrison and Associates. Her desk faced the wall, but she'd positioned a small mirror that gave her a view of the office's comings and goings. Through this reflection, she'd watched 3 years of corporate theater unfold. She knew things, important things, like how the quarterly reports consistently underestimated client retention because they miscategorized dormant accounts, or how the Patterson contract contained a calculation error that made her stomach clench every time she thought about it. Sarah had drafted dozens of emails to her supervisor, Mr. Hendricks, but deleted them all. Who was she to question senior management? During lunch breaks, she'd take her sandwich to the stairwell and climb to the 20th floor, just below the executive offices. Through the glass doors, she could see the corner of Marcus Morrison's office. The massive desk, the wall of windows overlooking the city, the framed photo she couldn't quite make out from this distance. Sometimes she imagined what it would be like to belong in that world, to have her voice matter, to be seen as more than just the quiet girl who processed data reports. Her coworkers knew her name, but only barely. Jennifer from accounting might nod if they passed in the hallway. Tom from IT had helped her with a computer issue once and seemed surprised she could speak in complete sentences. They weren't unkind, exactly just indifferent. Sarah had become so skilled at blending into the background that she wondered sometimes if she might actually be disappearing. But invisibility had its advantages. She heard things, saw patterns, understood the company's rhythm in ways that the executives, insulated in their glass offices, never could. She knew that Morrison and Associates was built on something different from other firms, something her father had once called the good company during their Sunday dinners years ago. She'd been too young then to understand what he meant. Sarah's handwriting sample lay hidden beneath her keyboard, dozens of practice attempts at the same 7 words, written in her careful script until they looked perfect. She'd been carrying the final version in her jacket pocket for 3 weeks, the paper growing soft from nervous handling. The morning ritual began at 6:45 a.m. in her studio apartment. Sarah would sit at her small kitchen table with a cup of tea and practice writing those 7 words. Not because she'd forgotten them, she could recite them in her sleep, but because the act of writing gave her courage she couldn't summon any other way. The Patterson account data is wrong, sir. 7 words that could save Morrison and Associates $50 million. 7 words that could also destroy her career if she was mistaken. But she wasn't mistaken. She'd checked the calculations 47 times, cross-referenced them with archived client data, and run the numbers through 3 different programs. The error was there, glaring and catastrophic, hidden in a subsection that senior analysts had apparently glossed over. The Patterson Group contract was the largest in company history, $50 million over 5 years, with performance bonuses that could push it to $70 million. The signing was scheduled for today at 3 p.m., with local media invited to witness Morrison and Associates' biggest victory, except it wasn't a victory. It was a disaster waiting to happen. Someone had miscalculated the service delivery costs by including outdated pricing structures from 2019. When Patterson Group inevitably demanded the services outlined in the contract, Morrison and Associates would be obligated to provide them at a loss that would bankrupt the company within 18 months. Sarah had discovered the error while running routine data verification reports, a task so mundane that no one supervised her work. She'd been staring at the screen for an hour before the numbers clicked into place, before she realized what she was seeing. The formatting looked correct. The totals seemed reasonable, but the underlying mathematics were fatally flawed. At 10:17 a.m., the elevator chimed on the 3rd floor. Sarah's hands trembled as she heard the familiar voices of the executive entourage making their way through the office. Marcus Morrison's voice rose above the others, confident, authoritative, unaware that his company was hours away from signing its own death warrant. She could see them now through her small mirror, Marcus in his navy suit, flanked by senior partners and assistants, moving with the purposeful stride of people who believed they controlled their destiny. Her heart hammered against her ribs as they approached her section of the office. The Patterson contract sat in a burgundy leather folder on Marcus's conference table, its 847 pages representing 5 years of negotiation and preparation. Sarah had obtained access to the digital version through her data verification clearance. Routine check that had revealed anything but routine problems. 3 weeks ago, while running her monthly audit of major client agreements, Sarah had noticed inconsistencies in the cost projections. At first, she'd assumed it was a formatting error numbers that should have been updated to reflect current market rates, but still showed 2019 pricing. She'd flagged it for review and moved on to other files, but something nagged at her. During her lunch break, she'd returned to the Patterson file and began tracing the calculations backward through multiple spreadsheets and subsidiary documents. What she found made her physically nauseous. The service delivery estimates were based on labor costs that had increased by 38% since 2019. The technology infrastructure requirements had doubled due to new security protocols. The compliance costs had tripled following industry regulation changes. But somehow, all of these factors had been overlooked in the final contract pricing. If Morrison and Associates honored the Patterson contract as written, they would lose approximately $847 per billable hour, a deficit that would compound exponentially. Over the 5-year term, the company would be legally obligated to provide services worth $70 million. While receiving payment for $37 million, Sarah had spent sleepless nights double-checking her analysis, hoping to find an error in her own work. She'd consulted archived pricing guides, reviewed industry benchmarks, and even called the technology vendors directly to confirm current rates. Every verification confirmed her worst fears. The Patterson contract would destroy Morrison and Associates. She'd tried to bring the issue to her supervisor's attention through proper channels. Mr. Hendricks had glanced at her preliminary report for approximately 30 seconds before dismissing it as data entry confusion and reminding her that contract analysis wasn't her responsibility. When she'd attempted to schedule a follow-up meeting, his assistant had informed her that Mr. Hendricks would circle back when his schedule permitted. The contract signing was now 4 hours away. Local news crews were already setting up in the lobby. Patterson Group executives had flown in from 3 different cities. The conference room had been stocked with champagne for the post-signing celebration. Sarah watched through her reflection mirror as Marcus Morrison strode through the office, radiating confidence and satisfaction. He had no idea that he was walking toward the most expensive mistake in corporate history. She imagined the devastation on his face when the truth emerged, not today, but in 6 months, when the losses became undeniable. By then, it would be too late for damage control. The note felt like fire in her pocket as the executive group approached her cubicle. Marcus almost missed it. The folded piece of paper had appeared on his desk between meetings, placed there so discreetly that he initially mistook it for scrap. His assistant, Rebecca, swore she hadn't seen anyone enter his office. Security cameras would later show Sarah Chun slipping in during the lunch hour rush when executive assistants were away from their posts. The Patterson account data is wrong, sir. 7 words written in careful, feminine handwriting. His first instinct was to crumple it and move on. Anonymous tips were usually from disgruntled employees or attention seekers. But something about the specificity stopped him. Not the Patterson deal has problems, or you should double-check the numbers. Simply, the data is wrong. Marcus pulled up the Patterson file on his computer and began scrolling through the financial projections. Everything looked standard cost estimates, revenue projections, profit margins that fell within acceptable ranges. But the note's precision nagged at him. Someone had taken a significant risk to get this message to him. He called an emergency meeting with his senior team 30 minutes before the contract signing. Richard Barnes from finance, Patricia Wong from operations, and David Martinez from legal hurried into his office, confusion evident on their faces. "I need you to verify something for me," Marcus said, handing them copies of the Patterson financial breakdown. "Check every calculation, every cost estimate, every revenue projection. I want this confirmed before we sign." "Marcus, the Patterson team is already here," Richard protested. "The media is set up. We can't postpone this." "Then work fast." For 25 minutes, Marcus watched his senior team tear through the contract details with increasing alarm. Patricia was the first to find the outdated labor costs. David discovered the missing compliance expenses. Richard's face went pale as he calculated the real profit margins. "Jesus Christ," Richard whispered. "This isn't a $50 million profit. This is a $50 million loss." The room fell silent except for the sound of calculators and rapidly turning pages. Marcus felt a cold dread settling in his stomach as the scope of the problem became clear. "How did this get past review?" Patricia asked. "The estimates were approved 18 months ago," David explained. "Someone updated the contract terms, but never adjusted the underlying cost structure. We've been negotiating based on obsolete data." Marcus reached for his phone to postpone the signing, his hands shaking slightly. In the outer office, He could hear the Patterson executives making small talk with his staff, completely unaware that the deal they'd traveled across the country to finalize was about to evaporate as his team scrambled to do damage control. Marcus found himself staring at the note again. 7 words from an anonymous employee had just saved his company from bankruptcy. He needed to find out who had written them. The company directory photo showed Sarah Chun in a pose of studied invisibility, eyes slightly downcast, smile barely perceptible, the kind of picture designed to avoid drawing attention. Employee ID 2847. Hire date March 15, 2021. Department Data Analysis. Emergency contact none listed. Marcus studied the directory as he rode the elevator down to the 3rd floor for the first time in 3 years. He'd asked Rebecca to identify everyone with access to the Patterson files, and Sarah's name had appeared on the routine audit list. Data verification clearance, a privilege so mundane that most executives forgot it existed. The elevator doors opened to reveal a world Marcus had forgotten existed. Cubicles arranged in precise rows, the hum of conversation and keyboard clicks, the smell of microwaved lunch and industrial carpet. Eyes turned toward him as he walked through the maze, whispered conversations trailing in his wake. When did he last walk among the people who actually made his company function? Cubicle 3 to 47 sat exactly where the directory indicated, tucked between the copier and the emergency exit, a location that seemed designed for someone who preferred to remain unnoticed. Sarah Chun sat with her, back to the walkway, completely absorbed in her work, unaware that the CEO was approaching her desk. Ms. Chun? She spun around so quickly that her chair nearly tipped over, her face cycling through surprise, terror, and confusion in rapid succession. Several nearby employees had stopped working entirely, staring at the unprecedented sight of Marcus Morrison conducting business on the 3rd floor. Yes, sir. I'm Sarah Chun. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'd like to speak with you about the Patterson account. The color drained from her face. I can explain. You don't need to explain. You need to tell me how you discovered what our entire senior team missed. For a moment, Sarah seemed unable to process his words. She glanced around at the growing audience of coworkers, then back at Marcus, with the expression of someone who expected to be fired at any moment. I run verification reports on major contracts, she said carefully. I noticed discrepancies in the cost projections and traced them back to the source data. The estimates were based on 2019 pricing structures, but the deliverables had been updated to current specifications. How long have you known about this problem? 3 weeks, sir. I tried to report it through proper channels, but she trailed off, unwilling to criticize her supervisor in front of an audience. Marcus felt a surge of anger, not at Sarah, but at the system that had nearly buried this crucial information. Miss Chun, would you be available to present your findings to the board of directors tomorrow morning? Her eyes widened. The board? You just saved this company $50 million. I think they'd like to meet you. Sarah's handwritten notes covered 17 index cards, each one filled with nervous calculations and backup documentation. She'd spent the entire night preparing, consuming enough coffee to power a small aircraft, rehearsing her presentation to her bathroom mirror until the words felt natural. The executive conference room felt like a cathedral of corporate power, 20-foot ceilings, leather chairs that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, and a mahogany table that could seat a small parliament. 7 board members sat around the table like judges, their faces displaying varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. Marcus had introduced her simply as the employee who discovered the Patterson problem, which somehow made her feel both important and terrified. She stood at the head of the table with her stack of index cards, acutely aware that these people controlled the fate of thousands of employees. Ms. Chun, said Eleanor Whitfield, the board's longest-serving member, please walk us through your analysis. Sarah's voice started quietly, but grew stronger as she explained her methodology. She'd prepared visual aids, printed spreadsheets with highlighted discrepancies, cost comparison charts, and timeline documentation showing exactly when the pricing errors had been introduced. The original cost estimates were accurate for 2019 market conditions, she explained, pointing to specific line items. But when the contract terms were updated to reflect current deliverable standards, No one adjusted the underlying cost structure. We're essentially promising to provide 2024 services at 2019 prices. Board member Harrison Lynch leaned forward. What's the actual financial impact? Sarah flipped to her seventh index card. Based on current market rates, Morrison and Associates would lose approximately $847 per billable hour. Over the 5-year contract term, that represents a net loss of $52.3 million. The room fell silent. Several board members exchanged glances that seemed to communicate entire conversations. "How did you access this information?" asked Jennifer Torres, the board's newest member. "I have routine audit clearance for major contracts. It's part of my data verification responsibilities, making sure digital files match their source documents." Sarah's confidence grew as she spoke about her actual work. "I run these reports monthly, but this was the first time I'd found discrepancies of this magnitude." Eleanor Whitfield studied the documentation Sarah had provided. "Ms. Chun, what's your educational background?" "Master's in Financial Analysis from Northwestern, sir, ma'am." "I graduated summa cum laude." Marcus watched the board members' expressions shift from skepticism to respect. Harrison Lynch asked several technical questions about Sarah's methodology, each one revealing the depth of her analysis and understanding. "One final question," Eleanor said. "What would you recommend for the Patterson contract moving forward?" Sarah had prepared for this. "Renegotiate based on accurate cost projections, or restructure the deliverables to match the agreed pricing. Either option preserves the client relationship while protecting company solvency." The board voted unanimously to promote Sarah to senior financial analyst, effective immediately. The new office key felt foreign in Sarah's hand, heavier than she'd expected, with sharp edges that hadn't been worn smooth by years of use. Office 12C came with an actual door, a window overlooking the city, and enough space for a small meeting table. After 3 years of facing a wall in cubicle 3 to 47, the view felt overwhelming that her former coworkers' attitudes changed overnight. Jennifer from accounting, who had barely acknowledged Sarah's existence for 3 years, suddenly appeared with homemade cookies and questions about investment strategies. Tom from IT lingered by her new office, offering unsolicited computer upgrades and technical support. Even Mr. Hendricks, the supervisor who had dismissed her Patterson concerns, stopped by to congratulate her on the promotion and suggest they schedule regular check-ins. Sarah found their sudden attention more unsettling than their previous indifference. She understood invisibility, had mastered it, even found comfort in it. But visibility came with expectations and scrutiny she wasn't prepared to handle. Her new responsibilities included reviewing all major contracts before final approval, conducting quarterly financial audits, and providing analytical support for the senior management team. Marcus had specifically requested that she examine the company's other significant agreements for similar problems. "Trust your instincts," he told her during their transition meeting. "You see patterns that others miss." The imposter syndrome hit her hardest during meetings with senior staff. Sitting around the mahogany conference table with people who had decades of experience, Sarah felt like a fraud who would be exposed at any moment. Her voice remained quiet during discussions, and she found herself over-preparing for every interaction. But the work itself felt natural. Numbers told stories when you knew how to listen, and Sarah had always been fluent in the language of data. She discovered inefficiencies in vendor contracts, identified opportunities for cost savings in operational procedures, and uncovered billing discrepancies that had been overlooked for months. Marcus began stopping by her office weekly, not for formal meetings, but for casual conversations about the company's direction. These interactions revealed a side of him that Sarah had never expected: thoughtful, genuinely interested in employee welfare, and burdened by the weight of decisions that affected thousands of families. "My father always said that numbers tell the truth, but people give them meaning," he mentioned during one of these visits. "You seem to understand both parts of that equation." Sarah's confidence grew incrementally, measured in small victories and successful presentations. She began speaking up during meetings, offering insights that drew nods of approval from colleagues who had previously overlooked her. The promotion had given her a voice, but more importantly, it had given her permission to use it. By the end of her first month in the new role, Sarah had identified $3.2 million in potential savings across various company operations. Her detailed reports impressed the senior team and validated Marcus's decision to promote her. For the first time in her professional life, Sarah began to believe that her contributions actually mattered. Sarah's college transcript told a story of academic excellence that had somehow failed to translate into professional opportunity. Northwestern University, Master of Financial Analysis, summa cum laude. Thesis on predictive modeling in corporate risk assessment. The document sat on Marcus's desk next to Sarah's original job application. Reminder of how easily talent could be overlooked. It was nearly 9 p.m. when Marcus knocked on Sarah's office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the executive kitchen. She looked up from her computer screen, surprised to see him still in the building. Late night? He asked, setting 1 cup on her desk. Just finishing the quarterly review. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. I wanted to double-check the international accounts before tomorrow's meeting. Marcus settled into the chair across from her desk, a gesture that still felt surreal after years of maintaining corporate hierarchy. Can I ask you something personal? Sarah nodded, though her expression grew cautious. Your academic record is exceptional. Top 5% of your graduating class, published research, glowing recommendations from professors. How did you end up in a junior analyst position? The question hung in the air for a moment before Sarah answered. I'm not good at selling myself. The interviews were. She paused, searching for the right words. Terrifying. I could analyze complex financial models, but I couldn't convince anyone that I belonged in a room with them. Social anxiety? Since childhood. My father used to say I was born shy, like some people are born left-handed. Sarah's voice softened when she mentioned her father. He died when I was 16. Car accident. After that, speaking up felt dangerous somehow. Like drawing attention might make other important things disappear. Marcus felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. He'd grown up with every advantage confidence bred into him through generations of family success. Social skills developed at private schools and country clubs. The idea of being afraid to advocate for yourself was almost incomprehensible to him. I used to think confidence was a choice, he admitted, that successful people simply decided to be brave. My father corrected that assumption pretty quickly. Your father sounds like he was a good man. He was, but even good men make mistakes. I spent years feeling like an imposter in his shadow, wondering if I was smart enough or strong enough to fill his role. The difference is, I had a safety net. If I failed, the family name would protect me. You've had to earn everything twice over. Sarah looked surprised by his candor. I never thought about it that way. That's probably why you're so thorough. When you can't afford to be wrong, you develop different instincts than people who can fail safely. Marcus paused, studying her expression. The Patterson discovery wasn't luck, was it? You've been catching other people's mistakes for years. It's just pattern recognition. Numbers have logic, even when people don't. Their conversation was interrupted by a security guard making his evening rounds, reminding them that the building would be locked soon. As they gathered their belongings, Marcus realized that this was the longest personal conversation he'd had with an employee in years. Sarah's quiet wisdom had a way of drawing out honesty he didn't know he possessed. The original company mission statement hung framed behind William Morrison's preserved desk, written in his distinctive handwriting on letterhead from 1987. Morrison and Associates exists to prove that business success and human dignity are not mutually exclusive. We measure our worth not only in profits, but in the lives we improve and the families we support. Marcus had brought Sarah to his father's office, now a kind of shrine that he visited when major decisions weighed heavily on his conscience. Everything remained exactly as William had left it. The wooden desk lamp, the well-worn leather chair, the collection of thank you letters from employees spanning 3 decades. Sarah read the mission statement twice, her fingers tracing the glass frame. My father talked about this place. He called it the good company. I never understood what he meant until now. Your father worked here? David Chun, maintenance supervisor, 1995 to 2003. He always said, Mr. Morrison, your father treated janitors the same as executives. Made him feel like his work mattered. Sarah's voice carried the warmth of cherished memories. When he died, the company sent flowers and a scholarship letter for my education. I never knew who authorized it. Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his throat. His father had established dozens of employee assistance programs, most of them quietly administered, without fanfare or recognition. The scholarship fund had been one of his favorite projects, helping children of Morrison and Associates employees pursue higher education. The layoffs I was considering, Marcus said quietly, would have destroyed everything he built here. Sarah turned from the mission statement to study Marcus's face. You were planning layoffs? 300 positions. The board thought it was necessary for long-term viability. He gestured toward the consultation report still sitting on the desk. Streamline operations, maximize efficiency, eliminate redundancies. All the corporate buzzwords that sound reasonable until you remember that redundancies are actually people. What changed your mind? You did. Not just the Patterson discovery, but the way you approached it. You could have stayed quiet, protected yourself from potential backlash. Instead, you risked your job to save the company. Marcus picked up his father's fountain pen, rolling it between his fingers. That's exactly what my father would have done. Sarah moved to the wall of employee photos that documented company milestones over the years. Retirement parties, holiday celebrations, the opening of new offices. In every picture, William Morrison appeared genuinely happy to be surrounded by his staff. What if there was another way? She asked. Instead of cutting people, what if we made them more valuable? Marcus looked up sharply. What do you mean? I've been analyzing our operational efficiency metrics. We're not overstaffed. We're underutilized. People are capable of more than their current roles allow, but they need training and opportunity. Sarah's analytical mind had clearly been working on this problem. Instead of layoffs, we could invest in professional development, cross-training, advanced certification programs, make our workforce more skilled and versatile. That costs money upfront, less than the turnover costs from layoffs, and the return on investment is sustainable. Plus, it honors your father's philosophy while improving our competitive position. Marcus stared at the mission statement again, seeing it with fresh eyes. Perhaps the choice between profit and principle was a false dilemma. Maybe the path forward required both. The anonymous complaint letter arrived in Human Resources on a Tuesday morning, typed on generic office paper with no identifying marks. Recent favoritism toward certain employees has created an unfair work environment. Rapid promotions based on personal relationships rather than merit damage company morale and established concerning precedents for future advancement opportunities. Rebecca handed Marcus the letter during his morning briefing, along with 3 similar complaints that had been submitted through the online employee portal. All anonymous, all carefully worded to avoid specific accusations, while suggesting impropriety in Sarah's promotion. There's talk, Rebecca said diplomatically. Some employees feel that Ms. Chun's advancement was unusually rapid. Marcus read through the complaints, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. The letters painted a picture of nepotism and favoritism that completely ignored the measurable value Sarah had brought to the company. They questioned her qualifications, her methods, and most insidiously, her motivations. Schedule a meeting with HR, Marcus instructed. I want to address this properly. But the whispers had already begun. Sarah noticed the change immediately, conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Colleagues who suddenly seemed too busy for casual interaction. The subtle shift from newfound friendliness back to something that felt worse than indifference. Jennifer, from accounting, who had brought cookies just weeks earlier, now offered only polite nods, and the quarterly report that would define Sarah's future sat before her like a mathematical mountain to climb. 500 pages of financial data, operational metrics, and strategic analysis that needed to be completed in 3 weeks instead of the usual 2 months. Marcus had accelerated the timeline deliberately, giving Sarah a platform to demonstrate her value in terms that even her critics couldn't dismiss. Let the work speak for itself, he told her when she tried to submit her resignation. Numbers don't lie, and they don't play politics. Sarah threw herself into the analysis with desperate intensity. She arrived at the office before sunrise and left long after the cleaning crew had finished their rounds. Her desk became a fortress of spreadsheets, reports, and multicolored sticky notes marking critical findings. The deeper she dug into the company's financial patterns, the more opportunities she discovered. A vendor contract that could be renegotiated for better terms. A client billing structure that was leaving money on the table. An insurance policy that was providing redundant coverage at premium rates. Her analysis revealed that Morrison and Associates had been operating at approximately 73% efficiency, not because of incompetence, but because of incremental decisions made over years that had never been examined holistically. Small inefficiencies had compounded into significant operational drag, but Sarah also found reasons for optimism. Client retention rates were exceptional. Employee satisfaction scores ranked in the industry's top 10%, and the company's reputation for quality had created opportunities for premium pricing that weren't being leveraged without working 18-hour days. Sarah developed a comprehensive efficiency improvement plan that could increase profitability by 34% without requiring layoffs or service cuts. The plan included vendor consolidation, process automation, strategic pricing adjustments, and a professional development program that would expand billable service offerings. The night before the board presentation, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel cautiously optimistic. The numbers were undeniable, the recommendations were practical, and the potential impact was substantial. If this didn't prove her worth, nothing would. The quarterly report presentation lasted 90 minutes. Board members asked detailed questions about methodology, implementation timelines, and risk assessment. Sarah answered each query with confidence backed by thorough research and careful analysis. When Eleanor Whitfield announced that the board had voted unanimously to implement Sarah's recommendations and increase her compensation accordingly, the vindication felt overwhelming. The company's best quarterly performance in 3 years had silenced the whispers about favoritism and nepotism. Marcus's pride was evident as he shook her hand after the meeting. Exceptional work, Sarah. The kind of analysis that transforms companies. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that her success would benefit everyone at Morrison and Associates, from senior executives to maintenance staff. The efficiency improvements would strengthen the company's foundation and secure jobs for years to come. The childhood photo emerged from beneath a stack of insurance documents in William Morrison's desk drawer, yellowed with age, but still clear enough to stop Marcus's breath. The company's annual picnic, 1999, according to the date stamp on the back. Families scattered across Riverside Park, children playing near the pavilion, while adults gathered around picnic tables. Laden with food, Marcus had been cleaning out his father's personal effects, a task he'd postponed for months, but could no longer delay. The desk drawers contained decades of accumulated memories letters from grateful employees, newspaper clippings about company achievements, and photographs from countless corporate events. But this particular photo captured something that made Marcus look twice. In the background, barely visible behind the main group of celebrants, a man in a maintenance uniform crouched beside a young girl who couldn't have been more than 8 years old. The man was pointing towards something beyond the camera's frame. While the girl gazed up at him with obvious adoration, Marcus studied the faces more carefully, and recognition hit him like a physical blow. The maintenance uniform bore the name D. Chun on the shirt pocket. The little girl's features, though softened by childhood, were unmistakably familiar. David Chun and his daughter Sarah. 24 years ago, Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone to call Sarah's extension. When she answered, her voice carried the same quiet professionalism she'd maintained despite her recent success. "Sarah, could you come up to my father's office? There's something I need to show you." 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in the preserved office, staring at the photograph with an expression that cycled through confusion, recognition, and wonder. She sank into the chair across from William's desk, holding the picture with careful reverence. "I remember this day," she whispered. "Dad took me to the company picnic because my babysitter was sick. I was so shy I hid behind the pavilion most of the time, but everyone was kind to me. Your father gave me a balloon and asked about school." Marcus felt a strange convergence of past and present, as if invisible threads had been guiding events toward this moment. "Sarah, there's something else you need to know." He pulled out the scholarship file he'd retrieved from the company. Archives, a manila folder containing Sarah's original application, her father's employment records, and the authorization letter bearing his father's signature. The scholarship That paid for your education, Marcus said gently. It wasn't just a company program. My father established it specifically to help children of Morrison and Associates employees. You were one of the first recipients. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she read through the documents. Her father's performance reviews, all marked exemplary. A letter from William Morrison expressing condolences after David's death and establishing the scholarship fund in his memory. Her own acceptance letter for the program, written in William's careful handwriting. You're probably wondering the same thing I am, Marcus said quietly. How could these two lives possibly be connected? How does a shy little girl at a company picnic grow up to save the company her father loved? The photograph seemed to hold answers to questions neither of them had known to ask. 2 decades had passed, but the circle was finally complete. The scholarship letter was written in William Morrison's distinctive handwriting, each word carefully chosen to honor a man he had clearly respected. The David Chun Memorial Scholarship is established to ensure that the children of our Morrison and Associates family have opportunities to pursue their dreams. Just as David pursued his commitment to excellence in everything he did, Sarah traced her finger along the words, remembering her father's stories about the good company with new understanding. David Chun had spoken about his work with pride that seemed disproportionate to his job title, but now she understood why. He hadn't just been a maintenance supervisor, he'd been part of a family that valued every member's contribution. My father talked about yours constantly, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. He said Mr. Morrison treated him like an equal, asked about his ideas for improving workplace safety, remembered my name and grades in school. When other kids' parents complained about their bosses, my dad would say he worked for someone who cared about people, not just profits. Marcus felt the weight of his father's legacy settling around him like a mantle. William Morrison's casual kindness had rippled forward through decades, creating opportunities and connections that neither man could have imagined. After your father died, my dad struggled with the decision to offer the scholarship, Marcus continued, reading from a personal note tucked inside the file. He wrote that David had talked constantly about his brilliant daughter, how she was going to accomplish amazing things someday. The scholarship wasn't charity. It was an investment in potential that David saw, but couldn't afford to cultivate. Sarah wiped away tears that refused to stop falling. I used to wonder why I felt so drawn to this company, even when I was invisible here. During my job search, I had other offers with better starting salaries, but something about Morrison and Associates felt like home, because it was home. You belonged here before you even knew it. The realization transformed everything Sarah had experienced over the past months. Her instinctive understanding of the company's culture, her fierce protectiveness of its financial well-being, her resonance with William Morrison's humanistic philosophy, none of it had been coincidence. The note you passed me, Marcus said, it wasn't just about saving the company. It was about honoring what your father helped build here. Sarah nodded, understanding flooding through her. He would have done the same thing. Dad always said that. Good people have an obligation to speak up, even when they're scared. Marcus made a decision that felt both spontaneous and inevitable. Sarah, I want to expand the David Chun Memorial Scholarship into a comprehensive employee development program, not just for children of current employees, but for overlooked talent within the company. People like you who have potential that traditional promotion paths don't recognize. That would honor both of our father's legacies. They spent the next hour planning a mentorship program that would identify quiet voices and provide them with platforms to be heard. The program would include skills training, leadership development, and most important, advocates who could help talented people navigate corporate structures that often overlook them. The circle of kindness that had begun with William Morrison's compassion for David Chun was expanding outward, creating new opportunities for future generations of Morrison and Associates employees. The mentorship program proposal sat on the boardroom table like a manifesto for corporate transformation. Sarah had spent 3 weeks developing a comprehensive plan that would systematically identify and develop overlooked talent throughout Morrison and Associates. The program included skills assessments, cross-departmental rotations, leadership training, and most importantly, a formal structure for quiet voices to be heard and valued. We lose exceptional people not because they lack ability, but because they lack advocates, Sarah explained to the assembled board members. This program creates a pathway for talent recognition that doesn't depend on self-promotion or political navigation. Eleanor Whitfield studied the financial projections with obvious interest. What's the estimated return on investment? Conservative. Estimates suggest a 23% increase in employee retention and a 15% improvement in operational efficiency within 2 years, Sarah replied confidently. But the real value is cultural, creating an environment where innovation comes from every level of the organization. The discussion that followed revealed the depth of Sarah's strategic thinking. She had anticipated questions about implementation, costs, timeline challenges, and measurement metrics. Her responses demonstrated not just analytical skills, but leadership vision that impressed even the most skeptical board members. Marcus watched with growing pride as Sarah fielded complex questions with poise and authority. The shy analyst who had passed him a note 6 months earlier had evolved into a leader capable of transforming corporate culture. Ms. Chun, Harrison Lynch said, your proposal requires significant operational oversight. Who do you envision leading this initiative? Before Sarah could respond, Marcus stood up. I'd like to propose that we promote Sarah to Vice President of Operations, with primary responsibility for implementing and managing the employee development program. The room fell silent. VP positions were typically reserved for executives with decades of experience and established track records. Sarah's rapid ascent from junior analyst to senior management would be unprecedented in the company's history. With respect, Jennifer Torres said carefully, Ms. Chun has been in her current role for less than 6 months, and in that time, she's saved the company from bankruptcy, improved our operational efficiency by 34%, and developed a strategic vision that could transform our industry position, Marcus replied firmly. Merit should determine advancement, not tenure. Eleanor Whitfield called for a brief recess, during which the board members engaged in heated whispered discussions. Sarah sat quietly, overwhelmed by the possibility that she might be entrusted with such significant responsibility. When the board reconvened, Eleanor's expression was unreadable. The board has voted to approve both the mentorship program and Ms. Chun's promotion to Vice President of Operations. Her first initiative will be implementing the employee development framework she's proposed. Sarah's acceptance speech was brief but powerful. I've learned that being overlooked doesn't mean being worthless. There are brilliant people throughout this organization whose voices deserve to be heard. This program will ensure that talent is recognized regardless of how quietly it's offered. The standing ovation that followed felt like vindication, not just for Sarah, but for every employee who had ever felt invisible in corporate America. Sarah's first business card as Vice President of Operations felt substantial in her hand-thick cardstock with embossed lettering that announced her transformation from invisible to essential. The corner office that came with the promotion offered a panoramic view of the city, but Sarah had chosen to face her desk toward the door, preferring to see people approaching rather than gazing out at distant horizons. The client presentation that would define her new role was scheduled for 2 p.m. with Hartwell Industries, a potential account worth $37 million over 3 years. Sarah had spent weeks preparing, not just mastering the technical details, but developing the confidence to command a room full of executives who were accustomed to being the smartest people in any conversation. Her presentation style reflected the same thoroughness that had characterized her analytical work, but with a new dimension of strategic vision. She spoke about Morrison and Associates, not just as a service provider, but as a partner committed to long-term client success. Her quiet authority impressed the Hartwell team, who had expected the traditional corporate sales pitch. Your approach to risk assessment is remarkably comprehensive, commented James Hartwell, the company's CEO. Most firms focus on immediate deliverables, but you've analyzed potential challenges 3 years out. Sustainable partnerships require sustainable strategies, Sarah replied. We believe in solving problems before they become crises. The contract signing that afternoon represented more than just revenue. It validated Sarah's ability to translate analytical insights into business development success. Marcus, watching from the back of the conference room, recognized the leadership qualities his father would have admired. Young employees began seeking Sarah out for guidance, drawn by her reputation for recognizing overlooked talent. Maria Santos from the mailroom shared her ideas for improving interdepartmental communication. Kevin Park from IT proposed a client data security enhancement that could become a premium service offering. Each interaction reinforced Sarah's belief that innovation often came from unexpected sources. The mentorship program's first cohort included 12 employees from various departments, selected not for their current positions, but for their potential contributions. Sarah personally met with each participant, sharing her own story of transformation and emphasizing that quiet voices could create loud impacts. Being seen means taking responsibility to see others, she told the group during their first meeting. We have an obligation to use our visibility to illuminate the talents around us. Marcus made the deliberate decision to step back from day-to-day operations, allowing Sarah to lead major initiatives without his shadow. The transition felt natural. Sarah's leadership style honored William Morrison's values while bringing fresh perspectives to traditional challenges. The company's reputation evolved from simply employee-friendly to talent-developing, attracting exceptional candidates who valued growth opportunities over just competitive salaries. Morrison and Associates became known as the firm where careers were built, not just maintained. Sarah's private moments of reflection often returned to that folded note and the courage it had required to pass it. Such a small act, motivated by desperation rather than ambition, had created ripples that transformed not just her life, but the entire company culture. 6 months later, the thank you note appeared on Sarah's desk during the lunch hour rush, placed there by someone who understood the power of quiet gestures. The handwriting was careful and feminine, reminiscent of Sarah's own nervous script from what felt like a lifetime ago. Ms. Chun, I noticed an error in the Blackstone contract that could cost the company millions. I've attached my analysis. Thank you for creating a place where people like me can speak up. Amy Rodriguez, junior research assistant. Sarah's hands trembled as she read the note, transported back to her own moment of terrified courage. Amy Rodriguez, a shy young woman who reminded Sarah of herself, had discovered a critical miscalculation in one of the firm's newest major agreements. Attached analysis was thorough, meticulously documented, and absolutely correct. The déjà vu was overwhelming. Another quiet voice, another crucial discovery, another moment when speaking up could change everything. Sarah immediately called Amy's extension, her heart racing with the same mixture of fear and hope she remembered from her own experience. When Amy answered in a barely audible whisper, Sarah smiled at the familiar sound of hidden brilliance waiting to be recognized. Amy, this is Sarah Chun. Could you come up to my office? There's something important we need to discuss. 20 minutes later, Amy Rodriguez sat in the same chair where Sarah had once faced Marcus Morrison, displaying the same combination of terror and desperate hope. Sarah recognized every emotion flickering across the young woman's face. Fear of being wrong, the greater fear of being ignored, the impossible courage required to risk everything for the truth. Amy, tell me about the Blackstone contract. As Amy explained her discovery with growing confidence, Sarah felt the profound satisfaction of watching the cycle continue. The quiet voices that had once been invisible were now being heard, nurtured, and celebrated. The mentorship program had created a culture where Amy felt safe speaking up, where her insights would be valued rather than dismissed. Marcus appeared in Sarah's doorway just as Amy finished her presentation, his face reflecting the same pride Sarah had seen when he'd promoted her. The company had transformed into exactly what William Morrison had envisioned, a place where every voice mattered, where talent was recognized, regardless of its volume. Excellent work, Amy, Marcus said warmly. I think it's time we talked about expanding your role here. Sarah watched Amy's expression transform from fear to wonder to quiet determination. Another life was about to change. Another career was about to launch. Another quiet voice was about to become powerful. As Amy left the office with promises of promotion and recognition, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The folded note that had started everything sat framed on her bookshelf now, a reminder that courage could be measured in whispers as well as shouts. Marcus lingered after Amy departed, both of them understanding the significance of what they'd just witnessed. No one is truly invisible, Sarah said softly. not when we learn to truly see each other. The echo of kindness that had begun with William Morrison's compassion for David Chun continued to ripple outward, creating new opportunities for future generations. Sarah's note to Marcus had saved the company, but more importantly, it had transformed the company into a place where other notes could be written. Other voices could be heard. Other lives could be changed. If this story moved you, I'd be honored if you subscribed for more stories that remind us how deeply we're all connected.